Every interaction that we have holds the potential to change a life. Communication is the art of making those moments count, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Hello, my name is Dr. Mark Guadagnoli. I'm a professor of neuroscience and neurology and the senior associate dean for faculty at the Kerkorian School of Medicine. So the more you know about what communication style you want to have, the more likely you are to get what you want in the conversation. So I want to start this whole thing by sharing with you something that happened with my son Max when he was about 8 years old. This really made clear some of my thoughts about communication styles. We were getting ready for church one day. 8-year-old Max comes in, he's just wearing his underwear, he's just finished playing his video games, and I said, Max, we've got to go in just a couple minutes. He says, just like this, yeah, Dad, church isn't going to work for me today because this is going on and that's going on. We kept going back and forth. And I said, here's what it feels like to me. I'm listening to what you're saying. And I'm trying to understand your objection to going to church. And you're saying basically anything you can say to get out of it. And he's like, yeah, Dad, that's what I've been trying to tell you. I want to play my video games. And that's really what it was all about. He didn't care about what he said as long as he could get to that point, as long as he could win what he thought was the argument. The point to all this is that if you know the game, you have a better chance of winning. And in the case of communication, it's actually possible for both people to win. So let's dive deeper into the two types of communication that Max and I experience: competitive communication, cooperative communication. In competitive communication, being right is more important than the relationship. The short-term win is what's important, regardless of the long-term consequence of this. So as a result, you don't listen to hear, you listen to attack, to see faults in what your opponent is saying. Throughout this communication, you're competing to have your point of view heard, not necessarily to hear the other person. So there are several signs to know when you're in this or when you're likely to be in this type of competitive communication. So, for example, if you find yourself preparing your answer or your rebuttal while the other person is speaking, if your body language is closed off or aggressive or dismissive, also if you find yourself telling the other person your thoughts, you may be competitive, especially if you're telling the other person that they're wrong. Obviously, this is competitive as well. Saying things like, well, you just said, and no, that's not right, and you don't know what you're talking about, right? These things are pretty obviously competitive. In cooperative communication, the relationship is more important than being right. The focus is on being very present, listening to actually hear the person, and in this case, you listen with empathy. One of the things that seems counterintuitive about cooperative communication is that it doesn't always mean agreeing. But what it does mean is creating space for alignment. Instead of listening for places that you disagree, you listen for places that you do agree. So there may be pieces that you agree on, or that you're at least aligned on, that you know that this is a goal that the two of you have, but you don't necessarily agree. But it at least gives you the opportunity to really hear the other person's perspective and then hear your perspective as well. It's important to know that these are not categories, competitive, cooperative, but they're ends of a spectrum. So people are rarely just competitive or just cooperative. They usually are somewhere in between, and the in-between can change from day to day, from who we're talking to, what we're talking about, and so forth. For example, you may have a very cooperative conversation about the weather, but when it comes to the best college football team of the year, that may be a competitive conversation. As much as you can in cooperative, if you're in cooperative and there seems to be something argumentative, try to shift from argument to alignment. Let's talk about a few ways that you know when you're in cooperative. So if you're asking questions, you're typically leaning towards cooperative communication. So let me give you a couple of examples. You could say something like, oh, that's really interesting. What do you think about blah, blah, blah? Or even saying, that's a good point. Be honest with this, right? It needs to actually be a good point, but that's a good point. What do you think about this? Or could it be that? Remember, you're listening to hear, not to argue. So be present and be open. At this point, you may be thinking that I'm saying cooperative is best, but that's not necessarily the case. Remember, we said use the right tool for the right job. and the one that fits your goal best. So I work at a medical school, and this includes trauma surgery, emergency medicine, areas like that. And in those disciplines, there are life and death decisions that need to be made in an instant. And in that case, it's more about speed and accuracy than it is about the relationship. Competitive may be the right tool for the right job in that case, but if you have a history of being cooperative outside of those types of situations, competitive is less likely to hurt the relationship. Another important question is, what if I want cooperative communication and the other person wants competitive communication? So one of my favorite sayings about communication and about relationships is that in any relationship, you're only 50% responsible, but you're 100% responsible for that 50%. So before you go into any important conversation, be really clear about what your goals are and how you can take care of your 50%. Ultimately, you're going to have one of three choices. Your goal could be to be right or to make the other person wrong, to solve a problem and improve the relationship, or your goal could be somewhere in between there where you really need to get your point across, but you hope that it helps the relationship. So let's walk through a few scenarios. We're talking with someone and it appears that they don't want to cooperate, that they're in a competitive mode. You can clarify the goal. You can say, can we just stop for a minute and be clear about why we're having this conversation? And then restate what the point is. Look, this is important. We're really trying to get to this. So I'm committed to focusing on that point, right? That's your 50% that you're taking care of. If they don't seem to be hearing you in that conversation or another, advocacy is important, right? And so you could say something like, okay, if I understand you correctly, you're saying this. And that way you can understand what's going on with them. And again, that creates a space for alignment. Maybe you find yourself being reactive or interrupting. Let me just take a minute. I'm sorry that I've been reactive. I want to hear again from you what you were just saying, and here's what I think you were saying, okay? And then you've refocused the conversation if you're the one who is not aligned with your goal. So I need to say this, none of what I'm saying is a communication panacea. This isn't easy for some people, especially when emotions get involved. So let me leave you with a few specific suggestions. Be clear about your goal and intentional about what supports that goal. Be patient with others and be patient with yourself. The methods that we talk about, they can take a little bit of practice. But if you do these things on a regular basis, I think you're going to find that your relationships really blossom. And if you think this information is helpful, please share it with other people that you care about. And as always, thank you for your time and attention and your continued support of the Academy.